The air hangs thick and sweet, too sweet, cloying with buttercream and the faint, sharp scent of expensive perfume. Laughter ripples through the backyard, a sound that usually feels warm, but tonight it prickles. My parents' faces are lit by fairy lights strung through the old oak, smiling their tired, happy smiles. They've worked for this for 50 years. And here we all are, gathered to celebrate, drinking champagne from flutes that clink against each other, a symphony of false cheer and unspoken histories. I stand near the edge of the patio, a glass cool in my hand, watching the familiar faces blur into a single, judgmental entity. They look at me, or rather, through me. They always have. Especially him. It helps me more than you know, just knowing you're here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It truly makes a difference. He's across the lawn, holding court near the barbecue, his laugh booming, full of the easy confidence that's always clung to him like a second skin. My brother, the golden child, the one who sailed through life on a breeze of expectation and inherent favor. He catches my eye, raises an eyebrow, a familiar gesture of disdain. It's a look I've seen 1,000 times since we were kids, since I dared to have an idea that wasn't approved, a dream that didn't fit the mold he effortlessly filled. He's always been good at diminishing things, at making the air around anything I touched feel smaller, less significant. He walks over, a casual, predatory saunter. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Still dreaming, huh?" he says, leaning in conspiratorially but loud enough for the few nearby ants to hear. He takes a sip of his drink, watching me over the rim of the glass. "Heard you're still messing around with that. What is it?" "App thing." The way he says "app thing" makes it sound like a child's toy, something insignificant and trivial. Must be, 5 years now? 6. He pauses, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the years he's counted settle. He knows the number. He's always kept score. He knows the late nights, the borrowed money, the failures. He remembers every time he told me I was wasting my time. "Look," he continues, lowering his voice just slightly, just enough to make it sound like concern, like genuine brotherly advice, but the ice is still there, sharp beneath the surface. "It's Mom and Dad's anniversary. They deserve some peace. Don't you think it's time to, get real? Get a real job? Stop chasing this fantasy." My hand tightens around the glass. The ice melts, cold seeping into my palm. A fantasy. That's what he calls it. Years of blood, sweat, tears, near bankruptcy, sleepless nights staring at a monitor until my eyes burned, the constant, gnawing fear of failure, the small, hard-won victories, the crushing defeats. A fantasy. "Some of us," he says, straightening up, puffing out his chest slightly, a subtle, animal display of dominance, "are built for the real world. We understand how things work. We build things that matter. Things that make money. Things that people respect." He gestures vaguely around the garden, encompassing his own stable, conventional success, his comfortable life, the life the family understands and applauds. He looks back at me, and the smile is gone now, replaced by that familiar, cruel glint in his eyes. This is it. The moment he's been building to. The public execution by casual dismissal. The final pronouncement over the failure he's always predicted, always desired. "Let's be honest," he says, his voice dropping to a pitch only I can hear clearly, a whisper laced with pure venom. "At this rate, you'll never amount to anything." He turns then, a dismissive shrug, walking back towards the center of the party, leaving me standing there, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "You'll never amount to anything." It's not just the words. It's the history they carry. The weight of every time he told me I wasn't smart enough, not strong enough, not him. The casual cruelty wrapped in familial concern. The absolute certainty in his voice. He believes it, and he wants everyone else to believe it too. That was years ago, of course. Or maybe it was yesterday. In this moment, under these fairy lights, the sting feels as fresh as the first time. The first time he saw me build something, a terrible little go-kart from scrap wood, and told me it would fall apart.
It did.
The first time I tried to sell cookies at a school fair, and he undercut me with store-bought ones, laughing as kids flocked to him. The first time I talked about my idea for this company, this app thing, and he laughed. A deep belly laugh, dismissive and final. Every rejection letter, every failed pitch, every investor who said no, every expert who called my idea naive, his face was there. His laugh echoed in the silence after. His words, "You'll never amount to anything," became the soundtrack to my life. They were the ghost in the machine, the whisper in the dark when I doubted myself. And I doubted myself every single day. The early years were a blur of ramen noodles and borrowed couches. My first office was a corner in a friend's garage, smelling of motor oil and despair. I built the first version of the platform myself, hunched over a dying laptop, teaching myself code from dusty textbooks and online forums. The idea was simple, revolutionary even, but getting anyone to believe in it felt like trying to push a mountain. Funding rounds were a brutal cycle of hope and crushing disappointment. Investors listened politely, then shook their heads. Too niche, too risky, unproven market, 100 variations of no. Meanwhile, my brother was climbing the corporate ladder, posting pictures of his corner office, his promotion, his bonuses. Every family gathering became a subtle competition, orchestrated by him. "So, how's the little project coming along?" he'd ask, his voice dripping with condescension. My parents, caught in the middle, would offer hesitant encouragement, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They wanted me safe, conventional, like him. They wanted me to amount to something they understood. There were days I wanted to quit. Days I sat staring at the ceiling, the weight of expectation and failure pressing down on me, ready to call it quits, pack it all in, and go get that real job he kept talking about. The temptation was immense. To shed the burden, to stop fighting, to admit he was right. But something inside me wouldn't break. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was pure, stubborn spite. Maybe it was the knowledge that the idea was good, truly good, that it could help people. Or maybe it was just the raw, burning memory of his words, his face, his certainty that I was a failure. That fueled me when nothing else could. The poison of his doubt became an antivenom, hardening my resolve.
I would not let him be right. Not about this. Not about me.
I learned to wear a mask at family gatherings. A polite smile, vague answers about the business, deflecting the questions, the pity, the thinly veiled judgment. I poured all my energy, all my fear, all my anger into the work. The team grew slowly, a small band of believers operating on fumes and faith. We celebrated tiny victories like they were moon landings, landing a small client, fixing a nagging bug, getting a single positive user review. The challenges didn't just rise, they multiplied, Hydra-like. Competitors emerged, bigger companies with more resources trying to copy us. Technical hurdles seemed insurmountable. There were days when our servers crashed, days when investors pulled out at the last minute, days when key team members left for more stable jobs. Each setback felt like a confirmation of my brother's prophecy. The world, it seemed, agreed with him. I wouldn't amount to anything. There was one particularly bad week. Our biggest client threatened to leave. Our funding was drying up, and a major bug crippled the platform. I hadn't slept in 3 days. I remember standing in the empty office late at night, the city lights blinking outside the window, feeling utterly defeated. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over my brother's contact. I could call him.
Admit he was right.
Ask for help. Get that safe job. The thought was a betrayal, a surrender. My thumb trembled. Then I saw a message from a user, buried deep in our support queue. Just a simple note. Your platform changed my life. Thank you. It was small. Insignificant, maybe, in the grand scheme of venture capital and market share. But it was real. It was proof that the app thing wasn't just a fantasy. It mattered to someone. I didn't call him. I closed the phone, took a deep breath, and started looking for the bug. That was a midpoint shift, though I didn't recognize it then. It was the moment the fuel source changed. The drive was no longer just about proving him wrong. It was about proving her right. The user. The stranger whose life was changed. It became about the potential, the actual impact, not just the external validation. The fire refined itself, burning hotter, cleaner. The possibility of an IPO had always felt like a distant star, a theoretical goal whispered about in late-night strategy sessions. We were too small, too early, too everything. But the platform kept growing, quietly, steadily, fueled by that core belief and the desperate refusal to fail. We found niche markets, built a loyal user base, started generating revenue. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to survive. Enough to attract the attention of a different kind of investor, people who saw the quiet traction, the passionate users, the potential beneath the underdog exterior. Talk of an IPO became less theoretical, more concrete. Meetings started happening in hushed tones, in anonymous conference rooms. Investment bankers, lawyers, accountants, a whirlwind of due diligence and complex jargon. The pressure intensified 1,000-fold. Every number was scrutinized, every projection challenged. It felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. One wrong step, one piece of bad news, and it could all collapse. And through it all, the secret had to be kept. Absolutely, completely secret. Until the filing. Until the bell rang. Keeping it from my family was the hardest part, especially from my brother. Every interaction was a performance. I had to maintain the facade of the struggling entrepreneur, the one still messing around with her app thing. I listened to his thinly veiled jabs, his advice to get serious, his recounting of his own latest triumphs, and smiled, nodded, deflected. Inside, my stomach churned. Not just from the pressure of the IPO, but from the twisted anticipation. I knew this day was coming. The day the truth would hit him, not with a whisper, but with a scream. The timing of my parents' anniversary party felt almost fated. The IPO filing was weeks away. The quiet period before the public announcement was suffocating. And then the date was set. The day after the party. A live announcement planned for prime time, East Coast time, which would be late afternoon here on the West Coast. Right when the party would be in full swing. A plan began to form, dark and satisfying, in the back of my mind. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about 50 years of being measured, weighed, and found wanting by my own flesh and blood. 50 years of that look in his eyes, that dismissive wave of his hand. This wasn't just an IPO. It was a reclamation. The deepening crisis was the party itself. The air was thick with unspoken history, with 50 years of family dynamics playing out in subtle glances and loaded compliments. My brother arrived late, making an entrance, of course. He worked the room, collecting praise, radiating success. Every conversation, he had seemed to circle back to his achievements, his reliability, his understanding of the real world, and every so often, his eyes would flick to me, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. He was waiting for his moment to deliver the final blow. I watched him, a cold calm settling over me. I had made arrangements. A large outdoor screen, ostensibly for a slideshow of old family photos. A reliable Wi-Fi connection. My phone, synced and ready. The live stream link open, paused, waiting. I moved through the party like a ghost, smiling, making small talk, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Every minute felt like an hour. The champagne tasted like ash. He found me by the cake, just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The light caught his face, highlighting the lines of arrogance, the smug certainty. He had cornered me, the audience of aunts and uncles and cousins closing in, drawn by the scent of impending drama. My parents were nearby, watching nervously, sensing the familiar tension between us. This was his stage, his moment. He had been building to this all night, maybe all his life. The golden child, finally putting the struggling black sheep in her place, once and for all, surrounded by the family who had always whispered their doubts about me. He started subtly, recounting a story about a friend's child who had pursued an unrealistic dream and was now finally back on solid ground. The parallels were obvious, heavy-handed. The aunts nodded sympathetically. My uncle cleared his throat. My parents shifted uncomfortably. Then he leaned in, just like before, the same predatory smile. "You know," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear this time, no pretense of private counsel, "Mom and Dad are getting older. They worry about you." "We all do," he paused, letting the collective weight of "we all do" land. "Wouldn't it be a relief for them? For you?" His voice dropped, not to a whisper of venom this time, but to a tone of absolute, crushing finality. "After all this time, it's clear, isn't it? You'll never amount to anything significant with this project." He used the word project like it was something you did in kindergarten. "Not in the real world, anyway." He straightened up, a look of profound, pitying regret on his face, a masterpiece of false concern for his captive audience. He had done it, delivered the line, the one he'd been practicing for years, the one that echoed every fear I'd ever had. In front of everyone, at my parents' anniversary party. A strange calm washed over me. The pounding in my chest stopped. The noise of the party faded. I looked at him, at his self-satisfied smirk, at the faces around him, a mixture of pity and agreement. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was the success story. I was the dreamer who hadn't delivered. I smiled. A genuine smile, small and cold. "You're probably right," I said, my voice clear, cutting through the quiet anticipation his words had created. "In the world you understand? No, probably not." His smirk faltered slightly. He hadn't expected agreement. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone. The screen was already on. The live stream was paused. The time in New York was showing in the corner.
It was go time.
"Funny you should mention amounting to anything," I said, my thumb hovering over the play button, "because I was just about to share some news." He frowned, confused. The audience leaned in. What drama was this? A desperate plea? A tearful confession of failure? "It's related to the app thing," I continued, my eyes locked on his. I saw the moment his confusion turned to mild annoyance, then back to patronizing tolerance. He probably thought I was going to announce some small funding round, a paltry sum that would only highlight the disparity between our worlds. I pressed play. The large screen I'd set up earlier flickered to life, interrupting the looping family photos. The CNN logo appeared. The familiar face of an anchor filled the screen, sitting behind a desk, looking serious and professional. Sound, which I had discreetly routed through a small speaker near the screen, filled the garden. The anchor's voice was calm, authoritative. "And in business news today, a surprising late-day development on Wall Street. Company name, a tech startup focusing on brief, slightly generic description of company's function, announced its initial public offering today." Silence fell over the garden. Complete, utter silence. The only sound was the anchor's voice, amplified through the speaker. My brother stared at the screen, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he'd been slapped. The anchor continued, listing details, numbers. Priced at, initial price, per share. Opening on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol, ticker symbol. He probably wasn't processing the words. He was probably just seeing the logo, hearing IPO, understanding the monumental significance of the moment. And with its initial valuation, company name, is expected to raise approximately $75 million in its debut, signaling strong investor confidence in the industry, sector, and the company's innovative platform. $75 million. The number hung in the air, massive, undeniable, a sledgehammer hitting glass. I watched my brother's face. The color drained from it, leaving it pale and slack. The self-satisfied smirk was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes darted from the screen to me, then back to the screen. He stammered, a small, strangled sound caught in his throat. A gasp. A pathetic, involuntary gasp. The audience around us was frozen, their faces a tableau of astonishment. My parents looked like they might faint, their mouths agape. My aunts, moments ago full of sympathetic pity, were now staring at the screen, then at me, their expressions shifting from disbelief to dawning awe. I didn't look away from my brother.
This wasn't about them.
It was about him, about those words. The anchor was still talking, moving on to other news, but his voice was just background noise now. The real story was unfolding here, on the patio, in the silence, in the shattered expression on my brother's face.
He couldn't speak.
He couldn't laugh. He couldn't dismiss this. $75 million. An IPO. A public, undeniable declaration of significance in the very real world he claimed to understand exclusively. He had just delivered his final, damning verdict on my life, telling me I would never amount to anything, and in the very next breath, the universe, or at least the Nasdaq, had announced the precise dollar amount of exactly what I had amounted to. And it was vast. He stood there, trembling slightly, his hands clenched at his sides. His carefully constructed reality, his narrative of my failure and his triumph, had just imploded. The ground shifted beneath his feet. He was blindsided.
Completely.
He had aimed for a casual, final blow, a quiet execution, and instead, he had walked directly into a cannon blast of my success, timed perfectly, devastatingly. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of the reveal. Then, a ripple started in the crowd. Whispers. Someone tentatively clapped. Then another. And then, hesitant at first, a wave of applause swept through the garden, growing louder, more confident. People started moving towards me, their faces transformed. Aunts who had offered pity were now beaming with pride. Cousins who had avoided my gaze were pushing forward to offer congratulations. My parents, their faces wet with tears, finally reached me, wrapping me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "My God," my mother whispered into my hair. "My God, you did it." I looked over their shoulders at my brother. He was still standing in the same spot, isolated in the swirling crowd that now embraced me. His face was a mask of shock and something else. Something ugly. It wasn't just surprise. It was humiliation. And a deep, cold rage. He hadn't just been proven wrong. He had been utterly, publicly dismantled. His certainty, his authority, his favored status, everything he used to define himself against my perceived failure, was gone. He was the one who, in that moment, amounted to nothing in the face of this undeniable reality. He didn't come forward. He didn't offer a word of congratulations. He just stood there, a statue of bitter defeat. The golden child, tarnished. The party changed instantly. The air that had been thick with judgment was now buzzing with excitement, with pride, with sudden, revised memories of my early potential. People I hadn't spoken to in years were recounting stories of my childhood ambition, seeing now what they had been blind to before. It was surreal, disorienting. The validation I had craved for so long was flooding over me, a tidal wave washing away years of doubt. But even in the midst of the congratulations, a part of me felt empty. The victory was immense, undeniable. The look on his face was the culmination of a decade-long struggle, the perfect, sharp point of revenge. But was that it? Was that all the years of sacrifice amounted to? A single moment of public vindication. I saw him finally turn, pushing past people, heading towards the house with stiff, rigid steps. He didn't look back. The rest of the night was a blur of excited chatter, questions about the company, awe about the number. I answered them all, running on adrenaline and the strange, hollow satisfaction that filled me. I felt like a character in a movie, watching myself from a distance. This wasn't just my life. It was a performance, the final act of a long, grueling play. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the fairy lights felt less magical, more tired, I stood alone on the patio, looking out at the quiet garden. The screen was off, black and silent. The air smelled cool and damp. The satisfaction lingered, a cold stone in my gut. He was wrong. Publicly, spectacularly wrong. I had amounted to something. More than he could have ever imagined. The scar tissue from his words was still there, but it felt different now. Harder. Like armor. But beneath the armor, a quiet sadness settled. The years of fighting, of proving, of letting his doubt fuel me. It had worked. It had driven me to this peak. But what did it cost? The easy relationship I'd never had with him? The simple acceptance I'd always craved from my family? The single-minded focus that had consumed my life? The $75 million was real. The IPO was real. The success was real. But the deepest validation wasn't in the numbers. It was in the quiet knowledge that I had built something from nothing, overcome impossible odds, and stayed true to the belief that it started with a simple idea in a friend's garage. He may have given me the negative fuel, the pushback that hardened my resolve. But the fire itself, the spark of creation, the relentless pursuit of a vision, that came from somewhere else. Somewhere inside me he could never reach, could never diminish. And that was worth more than any valuation. It was the quiet strength I had found in the years he told me I had none. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt underestimated or dismissed, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps bring more of these stories to life.